Hey, this is Mugwort, and we're just joining some live action between JannLee and VariantsOnly as part of the Crazyhouse Team League Season 8. So this is the first of a 2-game match, 5+5. Obviously these players are on board 1. I'm just going to post it in the game chat, the stream link. If I can find my own I think that's it. Be with you in a moment. JannLee just went live. Okay, we have a double stream anyway. And I'm on a bit of a delay. So what do we have? We'll just go from the top. D4, D5, knight f3, bishop f5, bishop g5. Often JannLee likes to go e6 and bishop d6 quickly. Obviously he has to find another approach against bishop g5, h6, g5, bishop g7 avoided. No, knight c3, knight c6, e3, knight f6, knight c3, bishop g7. Fairly typical. I think I had this against Die Blaue Sau where white played bishop b5. So there's a lot of different move orders. I think black, I castle with black in that position. I said it's a bit unusual because I'm used to the bishop going to d3 early. So h4 is another way to play. Normally I would have already castled if I was playing black here. So I'm used to this position after black has already castled. Okay, so it's coming back to what I'm more familiar with. Often white will just trade and replace the knight back on e5. VariantsOnly is whispering in the chat that it's in the game chat that it looks like VariantsOnly versus the finisher from yesterday. So I didn't manage to catch that game. So typically black would like to throw in knight h5 as soon as he can and try and harass this bishop on g3. And there's a choice here to either trade bishops and replace maybe on h7 or e6, or to throw in knight e4. I had a game against Master Tan in the recent match where I played knight e4, but this is without h4 and g4 included. So somebody was just saying that JannLee's just gone live. I don't know whether they mean the game. Oh yeah, I can see it on Twitch. Just looking at the phone. So he's also streaming. So what's just happened? Black castle, bishop d3, taking bishop at e6. Thanks for the follow, Tal's last cigarette. So last move was bishop at f4. I did suggest this as one of the options to replace the bishop on e6. So yeah, just defending the pawn on g4, which is attacked twice and defended twice. Rook c8 last move, just in case there's a knight trade and bishop takes c6. Marlon C saying in the game chat, more or less theory so far, isn't it? Oh, I don't know. I think I've left the realms of theory about 3 or 4 moves ago. So this h5 seems to indicate that white would like to trade something and stick it back on g6, a pawn preferably. And with the pawn on g4, it's always a little unclear if white should ever castle. If I was white, I'd prefer not to castle due to the danger on h3 and f3, and particularly h3. It must have been okei that was saying I did an opper move when the h-file was opened against Die Blaue Sau and stuck the knight on h3 when the pawn could take it. Just to avoid a potential mate on h7. Obviously a very different position, but he played queen d3 quite early when the bishop was not on f5. So have we had any trades yet? We must have had one trade for the bishop to get on f4. But it's a very low trading game so far. So JannLee is just looking for ways to improve his position. It's always a challenge in this blocked up, congested sort of position here. So normally pawn takes just creeps a little bit closer to the opponent's half. Are there any useful moves with the knight on f6? Hey, okay. It seems like a double stream. I guess most people are watching Jan, but I'm not watching him, so I can't hear his commentary at all. Yeah, I never know whether he's going to stream or not. I guess it depends how many babies he's holding in his arms, to see if he has a free arm to play. So d4, yeah, I was half expecting d4 because I didn't really expect Jan to play a move like knight h7 here. So d4, I would assume he's going to take back on f6 with... Actually, I'm not sure now. Probably the pawn. Otherwise, there's nothing defending h6. So e takes. Perhaps knight e4. Seems to be plenty of coverage on e3 at the moment. Whereas, perhaps, as I was saying before, one of black's strategies is to attack on the white squares here, like pawn at h3 or pawn at f3. So I'd imagine Jan wants to get in one of these two moves as soon as possible. Here he goes, pawn at h3. So take, he could possibly include the move knight at f3 check if it's any use. I'm not sure if queen takes d4 is really that helpful at the moment. Perhaps he'd rather go knight takes d4. The queen is just going to get harassed on d4. So knight at f3 check. If the king goes this way, can he afford to take the pawn and drop the knight and then put a pawn back on g2? Is taking the rook really worth it? He has to weigh up whether it's worth giving away the knight and dropping a pawn back and taking the rook. Other choices would be just knight takes d4. Okay, he's gone for it, so I would expect this to happen. Okay, saying in my chat, not realizing pawn takes is good is often a weakness of 2200 players who are strong at chess and new to Crazyhouse. Of course, Jan's level, he sees these rules of thumb are wrong. I guess he was talking about e takes f6 before. There's a bit of a delay. So purely for defense, this little 9 square box here, the bishop on g7 looks very passive, but it's really hard for a white to break through with the bishop on g7. Hello, Chess House TV 24. So we've finally seen queen takes d4 when all the pawns are exhausted, so there is another pawn for g2. And after king h2, I'm not even sure whether rook at h1 is yet a threat. You probably need one more pawn for g2 eventually after all the captures on h1, and then eventually rook at h1 will mate. So a pawn is useful for black because then there are serious threats on g2. Whereas if he's allowed to play pawn at g2 and rook at h1, everything is coming with check. I mean, there would be a threat for white to play rook at h7 if he had a move. So VariantsOnly has taken the rook on c8, threatening mating 2 with the rook at h7. Oh, so okay, saying he meant the other pawn. Strong chess players often make the mistake bishop takes e5, allowing d takes e5. I think he's lost me. We'll come back to that. Chess House is giving some link. It looks like ordinary chess. This is Crazyhouse. So yeah, what I was saying before, I mean, there is the option to play queen takes h1, so there's no direct mate threat even with another pawn in hand. So we see that the bishop here is covering h3, so that it almost looks like mate with rook at h1. Yeah, so Ryusei saying knight takes c8 seems risky. It's all a matter of whether black can... Well, he needs to do more than just take a pawn with check, because after queen at h1, there's no checking sequence, so black does need to defend against the h7 threat. So he played pawn at h7, g takes, rook takes c8. So allowing the knight check on g6, but saying, okay, it doesn't do very much. Anything else that white can do? White's got to throw something at him, because at every moment VariantsOnly would have to calculate this rook at h1. Now with the knight in hand, there's also a knight at f1 check, and then a promotion to a knight, so he has to calculate this at every move. So he's gone rook at g8. Yeah, I don't know. What's the idea if bishop takes? Knight at g6 then, king takes. There's too many pieces guarding f8. I don't get the idea if bishop takes, pawn takes, king takes, knight at e7 check. What does he have? A bishop, a knight and 4 pawns? And these 2 bishops could come in handy if the king has to run to e7 with pawn at d6 check coming. I don't think knight g6 looked mating, but this is worth a try, because yeah, if the king had to go to g8, knight at e7 actually looked kind of dangerous. So John says taking the pawn first, so rook sack on g7. There could be a bishop sack to open up the queen. I'm not sure really the queen's going to come in handy much, because the black queen is covering f6 anyway. Whereas knight at h5 check also doesn't really seem to go anywhere at the moment. So what to do? Attack or defend? Attack or defend? You lose both knights, then pawn at g6. Have you already given up the rook at that stage? Or was this before the rook at g8 check? So you would have still had a rook. Yeah, I had a look at it. I wasn't convinced with knight at g6 check. So he's gone straight back. I thought he might have gone to f7. So pawn at h7. Is he going to take all the pawns, or is he just going to run straight to f7? Bishop at e4. I thought he might drop another pawn on g6. So this is possibly for defense. I mean, it does mean if rook at h1 check, then there are lots of pieces defending the diagonal here on h1. So can he zigzag? King g8, king f7? No, he's blocked with a pawn. So I certainly think white is a long way away from a forced mate, because the pawns are not going to be enough. Now the question is how to defend. What about pawn at g4? Yeah, these checks are going to run out very soon. Over here on d7, for example. So king e8, king d7. No need to allow pawn at d6 check. So bishop takes g6 surprised me. I thought that bishop was quite useful in defense on e4. And my idea of pawn at g4 was to block out this bishop, so you could always answer some knight check with king takes h3, although actually it's pretty annoying, this knight check, because there would be a promotion to a knight and then knight takes f3. And if rook takes, I wonder if black could even promote to a knight. Sorry, a queen, so it's a non-checking move. But then pawn at g4, it's unlikely that's going to lead to mate with pawn at f5. I mean, maybe it's something. But I just don't think white really has anything. I mean, it all depends if black has a forced mate after knight takes e6. What is going on after knight takes e6? I'll just assume that the idea is knight at f1, because I can't see rook at h1 check going anywhere. So knight at f1, rook takes, pawn takes check, king g1. What does black have left in hand? 3 rooks. What are 3 rooks going to do? The knight here is very useful also. I didn't notice that before, defending g2. Just in case the king wants to run to h1. So he's gone rook at h1. I assume the queen is going to take. Even king takes is playable because of the knight defending g2. So it's still very much in the balance. I'm actually thinking white has the edge now. Somehow when I wasn't watching, he picked up a few extra pieces. Although surely this helps black with the king coming closer. I don't know whether there's any way to really introduce this queen into the attack. Maybe you'll end up sacking on c3, and there'll be lots of knight checks and rook checks on the back rank. So, oh, what? Surely you can't do that. Just go rook at h1. Grab the queen, put the bishop on f3, or the queen on f1. The knight at g4 is going to mate, so queen, bishop, pawn. Actually, pawn takes is not going to mate, because the king runs up to h3 in the end after knight at f3 check. So not as easy. I mean, I'm sure there was a mate missed somewhere. Could even sack the queen on g1. Okay, he's taken the rook for free. So there's got to be a mate here somewhere for black. Probably push f5. Push f5 to open up the diagonal here for the queen. Yep. You'd like to bring this queen in somehow with the check, but the knight's covering d1 and e2. Knight at f6, rook at h5, and rook g8's not enough. King is safe on f7, amazingly. So double check here. Discovered checks everywhere. Queen h8 must be good, because then you got knight takes g7, discovered check. Just, oh, what? Funny. Yeah, queen g7 and even knight d6 is not enough because the knight's covering e8. White can put a bishop on check. You just got to keep up the checks and make sure there's no funny bishop at e8 check in response. Wow, he's gone for defense. So a non-checking move. With 3 pieces defending d7, that's surely game over. But yeah, it was a bit unexpected not to do it all with checks. Clearcast is suggesting rook at e7 now. And then pawn at d6. So with the 2 bishops here, as pointed out a long time ago, when white had a check. It was about 15 moves ago. So I just noticed that this is a 60 move game already. And it doesn't look like ending very soon either. Wow, the knight is the only piece defending e8. This is unbelievable. So king takes rook, and then there's another. Oh, what? That's it. That's mate. Has to give the queen. What? I'm shocked. I'm shocked. So the king ran all the way down to g8, and there was a discovered check on the back row, and there was no mate. Oh, I don't believe it. That's got to be the game of the series so far. Can't stop laughing. How's it not possible to mate? I thought even some queen sack would work, but then I noticed there was a knight moving out of the way and then a bishop at e8 check in response. Wow. Wow, wow, yeah. Everyone's saying wow. Yeah, so what was the most convincing? Perhaps queen h8, some blocker, and then knight moves out of the way. I've even forgotten where the knight was. Was the knight on e8? And there was a white knight on e6. King on f8. So then you could play knight d6 when the knight was still on e8. Something blocks here. I'm so confused. Sack the rook, check, knight takes. I don't know. We'll move on to game number 2. So JannLee has done a rover to surprise variants. So a4, e5, rook a3, bishop takes, knight takes, d5, d4. Takes, queen takes, knight f6 and pawn at h6. I think black... Oh, white just has about enough already to justify losing the early exchange. As long as he has this pawn at a2 move covered and the rook on the back rank. Only seems to be one threat. So, I don't know, bishop at g5. I wonder if he even wants to give a check on e3, followed by h takes g7. Trying to out-rover Mania. King d1. Yeah, he could also play king d1. So an all-in type move would be pawn at a2, but then perhaps b3 is enough to cover with the queen defending a1. Wouldn't be so sure though. With a rook set coming and a bishop in hand. We might see one day pawn at a2, maybe not right now. I assume white's just going to take on g7. And queen e3 check, just to gain some time. So you guys watching John's stream at the same time? How are his facial expressions after that game? What was he saying? Another option is bishop at b5. Don't really see any reason why not to take the pawn on g7 first though. So bishop at b5 would be my choice. Queen e3 check is also fine. But yeah, you got to always have a response on pawn at a2 because you don't want to allow rook take c1 check and then pawn promotion. Although even then, rook at b1 may not be too bad. And then black can survive with the fake queen with queen a2. So bishop at b5. And then knight e4. Any threats on the horizon? Knight e4. He's got to deflect the queen somehow. I mean, I still don't know what white's response is on pawn at a2. So I'm not sure if white's just going to leave it there and intend to play rook at b1 to defend everything. So VariantsOnly doesn't seem to be interested at this stage in playing pawn at a2. Maybe he wants to leave the option open to sack the rook on a3. Because it does mean there's this hole on c3 to take advantage of. but it's unlikely he's going to get a rook or a queen in hand for d1. What else? What else is going on? Pawn at a6? Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem to be any immediate threats for either side. So why not take the time, go pawn at a6. Knight e5 might have been possible as well. So what's the idea here? Bishop takes f3. Why does he want a knight in hand? What is he going to do with it? Is he going to go knight at c3 check? Pawn takes and pawn at b2? Is that the idea? And you can't play king e1 and allow rook takes c1 check. But then does he have enough blockers after bishop takes c6 check? Well, he has no blockers if he goes knight at c3 check. So that can't be good. Well, in that case, it does seem to be the main idea to go knight at c3 and pawn at b2. If that doesn't work, because of the absence of blockers, for d7 I mean, then what to do? I mean, playing pawn at d7 just loses a ton of material. Probably just pawn takes rook and e takes f3 in that case. Although maybe then knight at c3 check is possible. So pawn at d7, or probably bishop takes c6 first. D takes c6. And then black has a knight and a bishop in hand. So if e takes f3 then, is knight at c3, b takes bishop at b2, such a strong threat. Oh, wow, I can't see this working out just on instinct. I mean, white just has overwhelming material advantage. I mean, surely this threat on c1 can be easily countered. What would you take first? Take the rook first? Otherwise, if bishop takes c6, you don't get to take the rook with check. King e7, and I was about to say rook at d7 and then queen takes c6 check. But if Jann's worked this out, I guess it must be good. Is there a mate with rook at f8 and knight at c8? Is the king running up to e6 in that case? There's a rook e8 check, something blocks. Actually, the king is out on f5 by that stage. Okay. What else? What am I missing? He can trade everything on d5. Queen takes d5. Yeah, this is a real queen, not a fake queen. Queen takes d5. Take. Maybe just c4 or knight e7 check after that. Yeah, it shouldn't be too hard to mate from here. Well, I hope I didn't say that last time. Bishop takes knight. There's also rook takes f7 anytime. Knight at... Okay, this move stops king g6. And queen takes bishop check. Bishop anywhere on this diagonal. He's looking for a cute mate with a promotion, I guess. Oh no, rook takes f7, that's it. It's a nice finish. Let's just come back to what I thought was the key moment in the game. I was expecting rook at d7 here. And then king takes and queen takes c6. I thought that might have been a faster way to do it. So after bishop takes f3, a takes b7. Yeah, perhaps the real problem is there's no blockers. If you choose to attack with knight at c3, pawn at b2, there are no blockers left after bishop takes c6 check. And if you're forced to play king e7, then there's a finish with queen e5 check and knight at f5. So yeah, maybe it was necessary to put the pawn on d7, allow b takes a8. Oh, perhaps white would trade the bishop for the knight first. Pawn takes, take, queen takes. White has a ton of pieces in hand. Maybe rook at f8 check leads somewhere. You have another rook after all the captures here. There's not many defenders around the king in that case. So I think that should be enough with a pawn knight rook in hand. Yeah, it feels like it should be enough. Pawn at g7, knight at f5, rook at e7, promote if you need to. So yeah, amazing game. Game number 1. Might have another look at that at another time. So perhaps I will just jump to the page with the Team League, which is here. So we have the second round has just begun. Not many matches played yet, but that was a 1-1 result for JannLee versus VariantsOnly. And their team names are here: Crazy Housemates and Radical Posture. So that was the first match there. Some other matches coming up. What's that, later today or tomorrow Sydney time? So we have boards 4, 5, 6 and a date for the finisher and clearcast. That's a board 1 match. And GSVC and Jasugi are actually playing a match for $25 very soon. And that's part of the Crazyhouse World Championship. So they're both in the candidates, the 12-player round robin candidates, but they'll be playing in about a bit less than 10 hours, 9.5 hours. And that's a pretty good time, 8 AM Sydney time, so I should be up for that one, hopefully on a Saturday. But yeah, I might leave it here. And yeah, I hope to stream again. A few more very exciting matches coming up this weekend, so see you soon.